Hi, this is Joey Heath, and in this video we're going to talk about the molecular mechanisms of force healing in Star Wars. So to start out, I'm going to say happy May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. It's Star Wars Day, and even though we might be celebrating it a little bit differently today than most other years, I hope you still take some time to enjoy something Star Wars related. So the issue of force healing comes up in two recent Star Wars releases. First, The Mandalorian, and then in Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. So before we continue, I want to say there's going to be some spoilers for both of those things. So if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend both of them. Love the show. Rise of Skywalker is my favorite Star Wars movie. But if you haven't seen them, I would make sure you see them, and then you can come on back to this video. So in the StarWars.com databank, force healing is highlighted as being something that Rey learns from the ancient Jedi texts, and she uses it to heal Vexus and Kylo Ren. The Vexus is the snake that you see on Pisana, but something that happens here that's unique is that it takes a dangerous toll because it transfers life energy from one being to another, and that's important to keep in mind for later on. So in The Mandalorian, we do see the child, Baby Yoda, healing Grief Karga, as you can see in this image here. And something to note is that there's not a scar. He's healing it completely as if the injury had never happened. It's something that I find completely adorable, is that Baby Yoda, once he's done healing Grief, he kind of goes on and takes a nap because he's tuckered himself out. In The Rise of Skywalker, like I mentioned, you can see Rey healing the Vexus there. Once again, no scar. And also, you can see Rey healing Kylo Ren after she stabs him with his lightsaber later on during their duel on the Death Star 2. But also, once again, no scar. She even removes the scar that she gave him in The Force Awakens on his face, if you take a look there. So the core question for this video is going to be, how do Force users accelerate the wound repair process? To look at this, we're going to start by looking at the natural wound repair process and how it happens in humans now, like what we can observe here on Earth and what we know about that. Then we're going to move into how the Force users actually manipulate this process, and then something else to think about while overviewing the entire process as a whole. To begin, I want to talk about the wound repair process, and this is technically considered to be in three steps. First, the inflammatory phase, second, the proliferative phase, and then finally, the remodeling phase. To look at this, we also do need to consider that hemostasis, which happens prior to the actual wound repair, is when the blood's going to clot, and it's going to be the initial steps prior to when the wound's actually healing. So that takes place prior to what we're going to talk about in the next few slides. So to start out with the inflammation phase, we're going to start looking at the vascular response. So how is the blood and the blood-delivering tissue going to respond to this wound? So first, blood vessels are going to contract, which is going to kind of reduce blood flow, and that's going to prevent blood from spewing out of the wound. We're then going to build a fibrin network barrier. This is going to help protect from foreign invaders like bacteria and viruses to prevent infection. And then in terms of a cell response, we're going to see an influx of white blood cells, which is going to lead to edema and erythema, which is going to be essentially swelling and the skin getting red around the site of the wound. Additionally, a few hours after the initial injury, you're going to see that neutrophils are going to be released, and they're going to release cytokines that promote cell adhesion. So that's going to start to get the cells that are present there to kind of start to come together to begin to form a temporary healing structure. And 48 hours to 14 days after the injury, we're going to see monocytes recruited to the lesion site. So monocytes are a special type of white blood cell that eventually get converted into macrophages. And macrophages play an important role in the wound repair process. So to start, they present antigens to neutrophils, make sure that no infections happen. They aid in phagocytosis and debris cleanup, so to make sure any killed foreign invaders or any host machinery or tissue that needs to be removed is taken out of the wound repair site so that it can actually be repaired. And they're also going to release cytokines that push the process into the proliferation stage or the next stage of the wound repair process. And while there are many, the most important ones are PDGF, platelet-derived growth factor, VEGF, TGF-beta, and FGF, fibroblast growth factor. So to move into the proliferative phase, we're going to start out again looking at the vascular response. What's going to happen to the blood and the vasculature? First, there are going to be additional blood vessels forming, and that's going to lead to an increase in material delivery. And that's going to be when there's going to be more nutrients, blood cells, oxygen go into the site of the damage, and that's going to allow the tissue to repair itself. Also, around this vasculature, we're going to see parasites. Not parasites as in a leech or an organism that takes from another, but a parasite as in a special type of cell. Those are going to be cells that differentiate into adipocytes, cartilage, and bone, and that's going to potentially help heal the wound area and provide a source of different cells. Also, in addition to the vascular response, we want to talk about fibroplasia, which is going to be the formation of a fibrous repair tissue on the outside of the wound, and the inside of the wound as well. So to start out with this, we're going to see the proliferation of fibroblasts, which are going to be special cells that form the extracellular matrix. They form it, secrete it, release it, and they're going to be what actually forms the extracellular matrix that's critical in wound repair. So collagen is what's made by these fibroblasts, and they're going to be the primary component of mature scar tissue. So the proliferative phase, we see type 3 collagen made, and that we're going to talk a little bit about the different types of collagen, at least those that are important for this wound repair process. But no, for the proliferative phase, we see type 3 collagen made. And we also, during the proliferative phase, see reepithelialization. That's going to be when fibroblasts surround the lesion or the wound, and it's going to essentially pull the borders together. And we're going to see epithelial cells releasing cytokines that stimulate keratinocytes to divide. And the keratinocytes originate from hair follicle bulbs. This is essentially going to be what closes off the wound and makes it seem as if there's nothing going on the outside of the wound. Moving into the remodeling phase, this is going to happen 2 to 3 weeks to 1 year and even longer than that after the initial injury. That's when we're going to attempt to recover normal tissue structure within the wound there that we had been repairing through the last 2 phases. So this is going to be when we take the temporary tissue that we made during the initial 2 phases and we turn it into scar tissue, which is going to be more similar to normal tissue. And scar tissue, like I mentioned, it's going to be less vascular and it's going to have fewer total cells than the temporary tissue that we made during those 2 steps, because those 2 steps were going to be when we're trying to initially repair the wound. So this is essentially when we're moving out the construction equipment or clearing the way so it can essentially be as close to normal tissue as possible. So we also want to think about collagen during the remodeling phase, because the type 3 collagen that I mentioned previously is going to be converted into type 1 collagen during this step. And type 1 collagen after that conversion will then be organized parallel. Looking at the 2 types of collagen that we've been talking about throughout the course of this video, first, type 1 collagen is going to be more organized, and type 3 is going to be more unorganized. And you can see that they're composed of different components. So when we look at normal tissue, there's going to be roughly 5 to 20% type 3 collagen content, where there's going to be 80 to 95% type 1 collagen content. Scar tissue, on the other hand, is going to have 30 to 50% type 3 collagen, and the same for type 1. So you can note there that there's going to be more of that unorganized collagen present in scar tissue. Continuing on with the discussion of the remodeling phase, we're going to see that there are some wounds that don't scar, and those are going to be the ones that have high expression of TGF-beta and FGF that are going to increase collagen expression and prevent the formation of scars. And that's going to specifically be the expression of type 1 collagen. Wounds that do scar have a higher content of type 3 collagen present than in most normal tissues. And we end up seeing rapid migration or apoptosis of the granulation or repair tissue in wounds that scar. So we're essentially leaving these gaps that are going to make the repaired tissue be relatively unorganized. So that's the science behind wound repair in normal humans. So now moving on, how are we going to talk about how force users manipulate this process? To start out, we're going to have to make some assumptions about force healing and the molecular control that the individual doing the healing has over the person or the animal that they're trying to heal. So we're going to say that they're going to be able to influence gene expression, influence the cell cycle, and influence material delivery through the vascular tissue, so determine what kinds of cells, what concentration of oxygen or other material like that are all going to be based on the action that the force user doing the healing is attempting to do. So in theory, if Ray is attempting to heal Kylo Ren, she's not thinking, oh, I need to influence this type of gene expression, but her thinking, oh, I need to heal Kylo Ren is going to affect this molecular change. So while I know this slide is full and it might look daunting, it is basically just a simple outline of everything that we discussed in the last few slides about wound repair and laid out in a timeline. So what we're going to do here is we're going to essentially go through and pluck out and change what force users could be doing to influence force healing and make the wounds heal in a matter of 30 to 40 seconds rather than weeks to years, potentially saving the lives of the people that they're going to be performing the force healing on. So to start out looking at the inflammation phase, we're still going to leave the fibrin network because we need to have that happen. That's a very simple phase that's going to be able to either happen on its own or be easily manipulated by the force user. What we're not going to see though is a large influx of non-specific white blood cells, and we're also not going to see that swelling and redness because those are essentially going to be there primarily to prevent infection. And since this is going to happen very quickly, we're only going to be moving a specific type of white blood cell, the monocyte, in. So while we do see that the monocytes are going to be converted into macrophages after 48 hours in initial wound repair, and then we see the release of various growth factors during force healing, and we're going to start to see when I'm making changes, thinking about what the force healing could be doing, we're going to put those in blue to show and highlight a difference. This is not going to happen after 48 hours of healing. This is essentially going to happen 10 seconds after the person doing the force healing is saying, okay, I'm going to do that. So that's going to be one of the things. The fibrin network barrier is going to form, and then the monocytes are rapidly going to differentiate into macrophages, and the force user could even influence several other monocytes to be attracted to that wound area. These macrophages are then going to rapidly release various growth factors that are going to then push very quickly the wound process into the next stage. And before we do that, we need to think about after making these changes, that's going to essentially make the inflammation process go from roughly 2 days to 15 seconds. Moving on to the proliferation phase, which normally takes roughly 12 plus days, we're going to still see additional vascularization to be able to deliver enough oxygen and nutrients to repair the wound. And we're also going to need those parasites present to be able to differentiate into the cell types that I mentioned before. We're going to need to also still see fibroblast proliferation, and that's going to be important in establishing the extracellular matrix. But those two different formation of different structures and different cells is going to be rapidly sped up by the force user doing the healing. Now, where we're going to see some variation here is that we're not going to see type 3 collagen produced or expressed during force healing. That's going to be replaced rapidly with type 1 collagen during the proliferation phase. And we're still going to see keratinocyte division and wound closure, and that's going to essentially be wrapping up the proliferation phase, which now is taking 10 seconds. Now moving on to remodeling, which typically happens 2 weeks to years beyond the initial wound, we would typically see collagen 3 being converted into collagen 1, and then collagen 1 getting organized. But since in the previous steps of during force healing, type 1 collagen was going to be expressed instead of type 3, that step is going to be removed altogether. The collagen 1 then would get organized. And since we're looking at tissues that aren't scarring, so with both Baby Yoda and Kylo Ren, we saw that the healing that they did, or the Rey healed Kylo Ren and Baby Yoda healing Grief Karga, we saw that when both of those healing was done, there was no scars. So we know that the scarring process isn't going to happen. So collagen during the remodeling phase, collagen 1 is going to get organized, and there's going to be no scarring, which means that there's going to be rapid TGF-beta release and FGF release. So that's essentially going to take this remodeling phase and turn it into something that's going to take 10 seconds. So that's a glossy overview as to how the force healing process could essentially hijack or modify the traditional wound healing process that we know is actually observable. Now that is kind of crazy when you think about it. Something that could take years overall in the real world can be done in just a few matter of seconds, as we see in the various scenes that force healing is shown in. Finally, just something else I wanted to touch on very lightly because I thought it was very cool and it kind of tracks with some of the stuff that we see in science that we understand. Something that Rey says to BB-8 while she's healing the Vexus on Pisana, she said, "I just transferred a bit of life, force energy from me to him. You would have done the same." What this reminded me of was the second law of thermodynamics, meaning that energy cannot be created or destroyed. Rey's not able to heal the Vexus or heal Kylo Ren, and Baby Yoda is not able to heal Greef Karga. You notice that Baby Yoda fell asleep after healing Greef Karga, and earlier I mentioned that it was cute, and it is cute. But it does also play a role showing that these people, when they're healing, are giving some of their energy, and how that energy is manifested could be a topic for a whole different video. But I thought it was very interesting that essentially the second law of thermodynamics is in order, where force healing does expend energy from the user and give it into someone who they're healing. And these are my sources. I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to thank Caitlin Akenclose for putting all of our Sci-Fi Fridays, Science of Sci-Fi presentations together this semester. Thank everyone for being wonderful Tri Beta members all throughout the year, and may the Force be with you.